Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the intro. That certainly doesn't sound like me. But anyway, we'll crack on. So, as you can see on the slide, and as Sarah's just said, this is part 2 of a 6-part series in critical control management. So, previously there was a session on identifying material unwanted events. Today we're going to focus on identifying the critical few. We have made a conscious effort to keep this webinar short, so it's a 30-minute session. It's all about micro-learning and sharing lessons learned, and hopefully it's of value and helps everyone on the call in their organisations. Before we kick off, a little bit about FEFO consulting. So I've worked with FEFO across a couple of organisations now over the last couple of years. That they've got a wide range of capability that you can see on the slide, extending almost to a global reach now. And my experience with FEFO has really been around a couple of different things. So excitingly, previously I've worked with FEFO on risk workshops and facilitated risk workshops like we'll talk about today, which is super relevant, and how they inform developing high performance standards. I've also worked with them on other things such as Federal Safety Commission and ISO accreditations. And JLL was one of the early adopters of the Health and Safety Index, which is a fantastic tool that's, I think, a sister company to FEFO Consulting. With that, over to you, Terry.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Adam. So as you said, today is webinar 2 of 6, which is exciting. So today's agenda is going to include a quick recap of webinar 1. We're going to look at what is a critical control and what is a normal control, options to identify critical controls, and also the pitfalls and leading practices. So last week, for those of you who weren't here, we spoke about the importance of understanding your current state and desired state. So it's worth noting that it's not one size fits all. Each organisation is unique. So the approach that companies such as Rio Tinto might use may not fit your organisation. So this is quite an important one to keep in mind. Last week, we also looked at the critical control terminology and the importance of getting that right early on. So if the terminology is not across the organisation early on, this can lead to some issues down the track. So it's best to get that right early. We also looked at leading approaches for identifying material unwanted events. If you missed the previous webinar, it is available through MyOsh, so please reach out through their avenues to find that one. And finally, we introduced the FEFO Critical Control Management Workbook. So this has been designed to guide organisations and provide practical tools. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks, mate. So off the back of last week's webinar, really where we sit in terms of this series is within your organisation. If you follow this trajectory, you're at a point where you know what your material unwanted events are. So once you've identified those, and that is really a critical piece, because the first step in any effective risk management is to understand the context and the scope of it. So to understand exactly what type of risk analysis you're doing and which material unwanted event you're trying to control. Once you've done that, you really need to pick the best method of doing that risk analysis session. And there's a whole range of tools in the industry that can be used for this, and different strengths and weaknesses throughout them all. And really, which one you're going to select is going to depend on the type of organisation you are, and also the level of control and ownership you have of the risk. So, for example, safety and design, probably not the best tool for a company that's involved in operation and maintenance, for example, because it probably sits earlier in that piece. There's other conventional tools like risk registers. My personal favorite, the Bowtie, because it's just super adaptable, super intuitive. We'll talk a bit about that. There's tools like fishbone analysis, which many people on the call have probably used before. Very useful as a risk identification tool. Very, very good in process safety environments and manufacturing. But the other thing you want to consider when you're selecting which type of risk analysis tool you're going to use is the types of input you're going to ask for, and who's going to be involved in that risk analysis session. So, some of those complicated tools like fault tree analysis, for example, they're not that intuitive. So if your intention with the risk analysis is to involve a bunch of people that don't necessarily come from risk backgrounds, you want to pick something that's pretty intuitive and that you can talk to and is conducive to a really good consultative environment when you're doing that session. And that input piece is critically important for a number of reasons. Namely, you want to get the end users and the people that are going to be at the sharp end in terms of managing the risk involved, and have that perspective informing the decisions that you make. But also the engagement piece is very important in terms of once you've done that risk analysis and you're setting those performance standards, making sure your end users feel like they've got a level of ownership and engagement with what you've done and the outputs of all this risk analysis. So a good case study to kind of wrap that up, Terry, if you jump onto the next slide. So safety and design, as I said, good safety and design really goes across the whole life cycle. So, you can see in the example there, if you've got a parapet and you're eliminating the need for things like fall restraint or arrested fall devices, that far outweighs the benefits. If you've identified the need for that parapet back in design and you've implemented that, that's going to be far more effective across the life cycle of that structure than doing a really good facilitated bow tie in the operations phase, where you've already missed the opportunity for that higher order control measure. And I guess, Terry, I'd be interested to know from a FEFO perspective, if you've encountered things like this before where, in facilitated design sessions, these things pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not just through FEFO, but through my previous roles as well. Quite often that you're, in a HSE role or operational role, left with something that it's impossible to manage now, or quite hard to manage because it's already been designed a certain way. And unfortunately, budgets don't always allow to knock things down and start again. So we're seeing more and more now organisations reaching out for a bit of support in safety and design and getting it right early on. So we are seeing it more and more. And feel free to reach out if you need more help on that one.
So I think next, we've got a bit of a slide around bow ties. And as I was saying earlier, the bow tie risk analysis method is really my favourite way to do it. So I hand over to you to go through this in detail. But one of the things to consider when you're planning to run some kind of risk analysis session is actually the mechanism to do it. So, you can have, there's different types of software, for example, that can be used for this, or, Excel spreadsheets or risk registers, whatever it is. One of the ways I find quite effective for something like a bow tie is literally to have a big whiteboard and, some post-it notes or something where you can get people in a room and work through the problem.
Yeah, you're right. Definitely engaging people is a key element of it. And so let's look at the bow tie now. And of course, many people here have used them a lot in the past, but let's put the lens on for critical control management today. So as you can see here, we've got the event that we're trying to avoid in the middle there. We've got our threats on the left, and we've got our consequences on the right-hand side. So, of course, when doing a bow tie assessment, the goal here is to identify controls, both on the preventative side, but also on the reactive side, so mitigating once the event has occurred. However, the critical part for today is looking at what are the critical controls. So the critical controls are crucial for preventing the event in the first place or mitigating those consequences. Keyword here is crucial. The absence or failure of a critical control would significantly increase the risk despite existence of other controls. So the control prevents more than one unwanted event or mitigates more than one consequence. So what is a control versus what is a critical control? So what we've got here is a couple of options here. So we've got a SWMS and a management plan. So a control should be an act, object, or system. So again, the SWMS is very, very important document, and so is management plans, and it could be an emergency management plan, traffic management plan, whichever one you're looking at. However, these are not critical controls. There may be critical controls within these documents. So what I'll do here is we'll continue on. So down the bottom there, we've got a person working at height with a fall system. That is a critical control, so making sure they're positioned well away from the roof there. And also we've got the fall arrest system, which is also a critical control. So you can see the difference here between the SWMS and then something that would be within the SWMS as the actual critical control.
I think just to add to that, Terry, one of the things that I see quite commonly, certainly in my current role, is that from time to time, when you overly rely on controls such as the SWMS or the management plan, there is a risk of waffle, so to speak. So what I find quite commonly is a management plan might say that the subcontract is to provide this and it's going to meet these minimum requirements. And then the subcontractor's document might say they'll align with the principal contractor's requirements. But, at some point in time, the rubber needs to hit the road in terms of stating how we're going to do the role, the task safely. And that's really where you want that focus on critical controls and knowing exactly what it is that needs to be incorporated into those processes.
Yeah, for sure. And that makes me think about the verification side of things too. I know it's so common for people to go out to a site to verify work's being done safely, look at the SWMS, see the detail and go, oh, that's fine. However, have the critical controls been identified and are they in place? So it's about going in there with specific intent and finding those critical controls.
Exactly.
Okay, so off to a case study. So there was an incident which happened a little while ago within an organisation where a worker was accessing a switchboard and received burns from a flashback. So you can see the picture here on the top right. Not ideal, would have been a fair bit of recovery there. So approximately 2 weeks after the incident, we conducted a risk workshop. So the idea here was to review the layers of defence leading up to the flashback. So you can see down here on the bottom, we've got the layers of defence, minimizing exposure, detect and deflect, the last chance intervention, and then we have the incident occurring there. So post-event, there were a number of missing controls identified. So you can see here on the left-hand side, a number of missing controls leading up to the event, but also a number of missing controls post-event. So what was found here was the critical, wrong slide. The critical control missing here was the absence of correct PPE, which may have prevented the outcome, which we can see there in the top right.
I think that layers of defence arrow down the bottom, that's a really good way to emphasise as well that a lot of conventional education around incidents and risk, you know, and if you think about the image of the Swiss cheese model, for example, you know, a lot of times that's perceived as ending when the incident occurs, but really what we're focusing on is the loss of energy that's going to cause the harm, and then there's still critical control interventions that can occur after that to reduce the consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it goes back to engaging the people in that process through the risk workshop.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Adam.
So what are some of the common pitfalls? And, you know, like Terry and I were just discussing, you know, over-reliance on the process and the safe work methods, as opposed to digging deep and actually making sure the critical controls are incorporated into those processes. So again, making sure at a certain point in time, the rubber's going to hit the road and we know exactly what we're supposed to be doing and what we need to have in place. Having an unclear scope. So back to the very beginning, making sure we have a clear understanding of what our role is and the level of risk ownership we have based on the role our organisation is going to play within the supply chain. And, you know, are we actually the one managing the risk, and at what point in that ownership point, you know, that life cycle, if you like, are we going to be managing the risk and what do we need to do? Missing material unwanted events. So defining exactly what unwanted event we are trying to control and making sure we've got all of those accounted for in our business. And really the leading practice for that, as we've been reiterating throughout, is to make sure we've got the right people involved in that discussion from the beginning, that, you know, they're capable, they're the ones interacting with the risk, and they've probably got a lot of that organizational knowledge to help inform that decision. This is a really critical one, and I'll talk about it a bit more in a moment in relation to one of the case studies, but developing the procedures before identifying the critical controls. So you see a lot of organizations do this, and, you know, they're trying to get the ball rolling, if you like. It's pretty common, but what you really want to do is have those facilitated workshops and have that consultation and let all those outputs and all that feedback and input from your end users inform the development of those procedures. So you're not jumping the gun, you're making sure you're building those from the ground up and getting the right information in there in relation to what your critical controls are going to be. And having some performance standards around your risk workshop facilitation and or your critical control design. So you need to have some governance around how you're going to approach this. You do see a lot of organizations these days attempting facilitated sessions and you know, learning teams and things like that. But without some of that expertise for facilitating some of those sessions, you can go a little bit off track. So having a really good framework around how that's going to be conducted and what those performance standards are is really important to navigating this whole process. If you jump onto the next slide. So this is a case study, safety at speed. I was actually lucky enough to be part of this. So this was FEFO being engaged by JLL, by my good friend Jeanette O'Brien. If anyone knows Jeanette, hopefully she's on the call. This was a great example of how you would facilitate risk workshops and inform the development of critical control management. So over just under a 10-week delivery period across a national basis, we worked with FEFO in JLL to run 8 virtual Bowtie workshops. So we had people dialing in from all over the country. They were facilitated sessions using visual tools. There was 4 senior experts mobilised from FEFO to support that. And within the JLL business, we had more than 60 employees participating. And the outcome of that, which was really positive for the business, we identified on average 9 new critical controls for each of the high-risk activities that we focused on. And those were used to inform our performance standards, which enabled those clear expectations for our operational management. And, you know, by having that definition, we're now able to have a targeted approach and focus on the critical few, which is that important verification piece. And that all culminated in us having 21 high-risk standards developed in that 10-week period that have been a great use to the business since then, particularly with things, you know, like Federal Safety Commission accreditation and all those other byproducts of successful critical control management.
So I guess with that one, you know, average of 9 new critical controls, there must have been a few aha moments there for the team.
Yeah, and look, again, going back to having the end users involved in it, you know, what was abundantly clear to me at that time was our people knew what they needed to be doing and what they wanted to be doing to manage the risk, but our system at the time wasn't necessarily responding back to them. So it wasn't defined. We didn't have that target on the wall that we could point to and say, this is how work is done around here. And that was, you know, one of the key benefits of being able to develop those standards, that we were able to capture that organizational knowledge and take all that input on board and say, all right, this is, you know, what our people have told us, and this is the way we're going to manage things henceforth at this level with these critical controls.
Sure. And those standards are quite clear, simple documents, or are they quite expansive?
Look, the thing I love about this, and again, my good friend Jeanette O'Brien, we talk about this all the time, but the one thing that, you know, we really feel like we got right in that whole process was all of the focus was on the controls. You know, we weren't worried about the formatting of, you know, what does the SWMS need to look like? Does it need to have risk assessment columns or any of that? It was all about, these are the controls. We're focusing on specifically, again, I keep saying that where the rubber hits the road, but this is exactly what needs to be done when we're managing this scenario. This is what we're going to focus on. And that's where our energy is going to be directed. We're not going to spend time worrying about insubstantial things that aren't directly impacting the risk. For our role in supply chain and the job that we do in the business, we're going to focus specifically on the control measures and kind of disregard a lot of other things. So maybe slay some of those sacred cows that, you know, we hear about a lot of the time. So we've got a poll here. So the question is, what topics would benefit your organisation? So the poll will pop up hopefully on everyone's screen, and you get to choose from multiple, so you can pick more than one option. So would your organisation benefit from general business risk management, HSE risk management, the identification of your material unwanted events, identifying your critical controls, facilitated risk workshops, or any other? So we'll give it a couple of seconds, and then we should start to see some answers rolling in.
How are we looking there, Sarah? Okay, I'm not seeing anything come through just yet. Are you seeing anything?
Here we go. Okay, so 8% of people said general business risk management, 13% said HSE risk management, identifying material unwanted events was 15%, and then the top two, critical control identification at 28% and risk workshop facilitating 36%. So in general, the preference is to benefit from assistance in identifying critical controls and facilitating some of those risk workshops that inform that.
Yeah.
And I think in the chat there, I'm seeing it was a single option. So apologies for everyone on that.
Okay, everyone, I got lost. I lost my internet, but I'm back with the safety of
back,
mobile. So I don't know what happened to the poll or what happened to me, but the poll's still going. So I'll end it now and show you the results. Okay.
Okay, yeah, so just to recap on that, I just read them out, but again, the top two by far, 36% were interested in risk workshop facilitation and 28% focused on identifying critical controls. Only 8% on just general business risk management.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess for those risk workshops too, organisations can do them internally, or if they do need some support, there's a lot of support out there and resources to help do that. So
I generally agree with that sentiment too. You know, the facilitated workshop is great for that consultation piece and getting that end user engagement. So I actually I empathise with that sentiment. That's very true in my book as well.
It can be quite valuable having someone external to poke the bear as such. So on that topic of additional help, so you know, FEFO are here to help. So I want to go through a few options we've got here. So we've developed that self-directed workbook. So if anyone would like a copy of that or would like more information, please feel free to reach out. We've got Mark Wright, who's the Managing Director of FEFO, and myself. We've got our Calendly there, and we are offering a complimentary discovery workshop. So discovery workshop is not the risk workshop. It is discovery workshop to see what's going to work best for you and your organisation. As you can see there, we do workshops. We offer critical control management training and system development, third-party verification, which is becoming increasingly popular to do, and also strategy and reporting assistance as well. There is a whole heap of information out there. So you can see a few options here. ICMM and Riskgate are very good resources. However, they are very mining focused. So when you're reading through those, please put the lens on of your organisation. Just because it says it in that document doesn't mean it's going to be right for what your outcomes are. And okay, moving forward to next week, future webinar, so part 3. So we're joined from Caitlin from, so it's moving this over. We're joined from Caitlin from, had a brain fog there, from Lockheed Martin. So Caitlin's going to be joining us next week to go through, so we're having some internet problems as well here. You able to take over, Adam?
Yeah. So Caitlin, I actually know Caitlin. She's a cracking professional. She's in a senior role across Asia Pacific for Lockheed Martin. And I think the scope for that is to discuss critical performance standards. So again, going back to that earlier point around making sure you really understand what those performance standards are going to look like, and you've got a clear picture of that as you set out on the journey. Great,
thanks for jumping in there. My screen's freezing, so it's causing some drama.
You look great on my screen, mate.
So that wraps it up for today, unless we've got any questions coming through, Sarah.
Not yet, but I do. I have shared the link again so that they can register for next week's Wednesday CCM series if they haven't already done so. I'm also going to share a webinar for tomorrow because we're still doing our Thursday webinars. We're just a little bit crowded at the moment, I think, trying to cram everything in before the end of the year. So that one tomorrow is by David Proven and Ralph Shreve, and they're covering shape supervision, redefining frontline safety leadership. Haven't got any questions yet, but just a reminder that we'll send this out later today, video and podcast, which is helpful if you're super busy and you want to do it on the train. Hang on, there's a question. Other than the ICMM, do you know of any decision tree flowcharts to determine critical controls?
Yeah, so I mean, if I'm understanding the question, there's a couple of good risk analysis tools that can be used to identify critical controls. Again, the best one for your organization, you'd have to do some kind of benefit analysis, but there's things like Swift analysis, fault tree analysis, obviously. You know, they're all visual tools. Even the Bowtie, as Terry said earlier, they're visual tools to help you identify where your critical interventions are going to lie in managing that material unwanted event.
Just to add to that too, I think don't get caught up trying to make it too complex. If something like a Bowtie works well, stick with that.
Okay, well, that's that question. So we don't have any more. And as you said, we're keeping it short and sweet, which is good for people busy. So we'll look forward to next week. And thank you, Adam and Terry, for joining us today. And the slides will go out. It's got your contact details on. So if they have any questions or they want to talk more with you about what you can do, then that will go out in the email later today. So thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you either tomorrow or next Wednesday.
Great. Thanks for having us.